It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, April 17th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that thinks the real victory was the friends we made along the way.
My head is spinning.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. You can find us for free over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is our final parking lot report of the season from Russ, hanging outside the Wells Fargo Center after game 82, where the Flyers were eliminated from playoff contention. And a lot of mixed emotions right now, Russ, as you know, you have to start reflecting on the season as a whole, but also look at this game in and of itself at once. And I gotta say, like, I feel like this game in a lot of ways was a microcosm of the whole season.
Yeah.
Where you had a team that just worked its tail off, doing everything they possibly could, where they couldn't finish and the power play failed them.
Right. I mean, it's the same things that carry through. You're right. I mean, the power play again was just such a mess. And, again, really disappointing the way it just never got better. Like, it just was bad. It started bad. It ended bad. It was good for about 2 weeks, I think, this whole year.
Yeah, of course, we will get into that in more detail over the coming weeks as we analyze the season that was. I think, as I'm trying to recover from watching Scott Lawton almost cry, he, I feel so bad for him. At any rate, I do think that Sam Ersson deserves a ton of credit, made a ton of key saves. You know, the one real goal that the Caps got was kind of half lucky.
Sure, but, those things happen, especially in big, tight games. Yeah. And we all knew it was going to be a big, tight game. So, yeah, he played well. I thought he gave up a few too many rebounds in the second period, I think it was. But, no, otherwise he played a solid game.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the other question I guess you would have to ask about this game is, did they go for it enough in the third? You know, even with the goalie pull, I think that, you could probably make an argument either way. I think they were trying everything they had in their bag of tricks, and maybe it just wasn't quite enough. But at the same time, as far as the roster and lineup choices, and as far as who he was putting out on the ice, maybe you could call out into question.
Well, all right. So I would say that going for it, yes, they went for it, but it wasn't like they went for the dagger. Like, that 6-on-5 was the same mediocre 6-on-5 that they've had most of the year, right? And so you almost wish they tried something completely different with that, just simply because they've had a lot of failure with it. But they went with it. We noticed they were shortening the bench a lot, so there were some tired guys out there, and that probably didn't bode well for that point in the game where you wanted them to kind of rise to the occasion. And let's face it, the Caps, I would say, with 7 minutes to go in that game, started stacking the line. They became very defensive. Yeah. They knew all they had to do was get a tie to be in good shape, or, it's not a tie, but to get it to overtime. And so they were almost playing it to go to overtime. And so that's where you wonder what the Flyers' game plan was at that point, because the Capitals knew, like Spencer Carberry told his team, hey, they're going to pull their goalie early, most likely, so be ready for it. And they were. Dylan Strome, had told me that.
Right.
But I don't know on the Flyers end if they really did have any tricks up their sleeve. Didn't seem like it.
Right. And I think that, one of the more interesting choices that was made in this game was benching Morgan Frost and Bobby Brink, because
Right.
Morgan Frost in particular
Yeah.
has been such a catalyst this season that when you're in this sort of situation, like, you have a guy with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder who has been producing. Like, why is he not out there in key situations?
I would say this. We were all surprised that he was benched. Brink, I knew they would shorten the bench on Brink if he didn't score. Okay. Whether it's fair or not, that's another day's discussion. None of us were happy, or we all were surprised that Frost got that treatment, because now that's the end of his season. And he overcame that other stuff with John this season, and he did it to him again. And so, like, I didn't like that at all. I don't support it.
Yeah, that's the thing I think that upset me, is that after everything we've been through this season, to go out on a note like that for him in particular, I just don't get it. It just, there's no justification for it, in my
No.
opinion. And especially when you know how hard Morgan Frost works, and how I think integral he can be to generating offense when that's entirely what you need. Like, why do you sit him?
Right. And while Short Couturier was having a good game defensively and he got his assist, he was not good in the circle. Nobody was good in the circle. Paling got
Yeah.
killed in the circle. And so he could have helped you there. But again, this is what happens when you do something John doesn't like. It's a big game. All of a sudden, he relies on veterans again. And this is something you have to worry about for next year, too. Like,
Yeah.
you have to be so good and almost near perfect as a rookie like Forster was, and he wasn't at the beginning, to get the kind of playing time he got, honestly. So it's hard. It's hard for young guys to break into the Flyers roster.
Yeah, that's why I just feel like this game was just so indicative of everything that we have seen this season. But, at the same time, you have to say, well, the fact that the Flyers were even in it in game 82 is
Sure,
just,
that's a plus.
yeah. And it's hard not to have some of those feelings immediately and feel good about the season overall. But recognize that, yeah, there's like clearly room to grow, things to improve on, and in, year 1 or 1A of a rebuild, depending on who you talk to. I think that, that's good progress.
Yeah, that part's good progress. I think, like I said, the front office and the coach, I think, have to have better communication. I think that's imperative for next year. So we'll see how things like that go. There's already going to be this reaction that, hey, well, look, we weren't supposed to be here this year, and so the Flyers will be better next year. And, like I said, there's a lot that goes into that. I'm not fully convinced of that yet. So sometimes these years happen, and you just have these opportunities, and it's definitely good that they rode it as far as they could. But yeah, I do kind of wish that some of the other guys could have ended it on a higher note for themselves. But that's just the way it is.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in the next segment, but I do want to touch on the other important result of the night, just because it was absolutely bonkers, like the two games going on
Yeah.
and the last 2 minutes of both games, with the goalie pull for the Flyers and the timing related to the Detroit Red Wings scoring with 3 seconds left to tie it up, winning in overtime on their part. So they did what they had to do.
I kept
And then to have the
refreshing my computer.
Flyers ruin it.
Right. So I kept refreshing my computer, and so did Mike Luongo next to me. But then we were looking in the GM box, because it had the big screen TVs, and it looked like the game was still going on. Then Mike says, "Wait, I got an update. It's a tie game." And I said, "Their feed is behind. That's the problem." So the goal, we didn't see that goal until 6 seconds or 10 seconds after it actually was scored. So
Right.
that kind of threw us all off. But again, people were, and this is just indicative of Montreal, right? People were telling me Montreal's up 1-0. I'm like, it doesn't matter. They lost a 3-goal lead the night before. Then I heard they're up 3-1, and I said, it doesn't matter. This team can't hold a lead, and they couldn't. Like, that's not the Flyers' fault.
No, but it's funny though, because you look at it and you're like, okay, if you pull the goalie, there's a high probability, like you said, that somebody's going to score on the empty net,
Yeah.
and you're going to automatically send the Washington Capitals to the playoffs. But you take the Red Wings, who kind of hosed you a little bit with tying up that game, and you take down the Penguins at the same time. I feel like the scales of justice evened out a little bit there.
Yeah, I think on that end it did. I think on the end that you could have ended the season on a win, you got a little
I know.
chancy with that.
Yeah, it is true. It is true. I think this is something that we'll talk about a lot in the off season, and feel differently about it at different times. But the Flyers also gave out their end of season awards, so we are going to talk about them, and our end of season hot takes continue coming up next. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to your first pitch. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, view from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. My favorite part is getting notified about those last minute flash deals and that all important view from your seat before you buy. Game Time lets you save even more with zone deals, where you pick a section and let Game Time choose the seat and all in pricing. So there's no surprise fees at checkout. Also, those tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. It's the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Live tonight, Wednesday, April 17th at 7 Eastern, streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel, available on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Find the ultimate 6-episode series to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. That's the Locked On NFL Mock Draft tonight at 7 Eastern, streaming live on Locked On Sports Today, our 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, Russ. So prior to the game, it was really interesting because they announced them well before the game, as opposed to at the beginning of the game on the ice.
Right. They did them downstairs.
Time.
Yeah, they did them downstairs before the game, and we didn't know. A lot of us didn't even know what was going on.
Yeah, it was really interesting that they did it that way. They did announce the day before a new award, the Flyers Alumni Community Leadership Award, as part of the Alumni Association and their involvement in the organization. And the first award that they gave to the Flyer who best demonstrates outstanding leadership on and off the ice and contribution to the community was Scott Lawton. Absolute no-brainer.
Yeah,
He has been
that was great.
The most active and vocal member of the Flyers in terms of community involvement, and yep. I feel so lucky that we have Scott Lawton on the Flyers and part of this community, because he is just such a tremendous person and athlete. And once again, I'm like welling up with tears because just remembering how sad he was at the podium there too.
Yeah,
but
he's a good dude.
Yeah, we love you, Scott Lawton, and I certainly do as well. The Barry Ashby Trophy for Best Defenseman went to Travis Sanheim.
Yeah, I think that's true. He did fill big shoes. It wasn't perfect at times, but I do think that that was just.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he had such a huge assignment this year
Yeah.
and like you said, big shoes to fill. And I think, he had his moments, but I think he was up to the challenge. And I think that this year was really good for him as a
Hmm.
learning experience,
For sure.
and creates a little bit of a leadership position for himself on the blue line there. So I'm super proud of him. The Bobby Clark Trophy for Team MVP, along with the Toyota Cup winner for the most game star selections, went to, of course, Travis Konechny. That was a no
Easy.
brainer there. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was our actually, I think preseason, we said who was going to get the most points, and we said Konechny, and he did, right? So,
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And the Yannick Dupre Memorial Class Guy Award, which I'm still kind of nebulous on what it means, but
yeah.
I also agree that Nick Seeler deserved that
Yeah, he's a
award.
great guy, and actually does fit that bill. So I give it to him.
Yeah, absolutely. He's just a stand-up guy
He
and,
is.
obviously puts everything on the line every game, and you can't ask for more from a Philadelphia Flyer.
No.
The Lindbergh Memorial Award goes to the most improved player of the season, and they gave it to Cam York.
Yeah, I think that's true. I can go with that. There's probably a couple others that we could name, but yeah, that's a good choice.
Yeah, I think in terms of expectation versus, action, and where we were at the beginning of the season with him, and just as we talked about Travis Sanheim having to fill big shoes. Well, Cam York basically had to fill Travis Sanheim's old shoes, right?
Right. Right.
In a lot of ways, and even more so to some degree
Yeah,
because
more so he got more minutes at times.
he got a lot more minutes, and even more minutes than Sanheim in some games. And I think that, as far as his confidence and being comfortable in that role just grew by leaps and bounds in this season. I think he has a ways to go, but I think that he knows how to get there now.
Yeah.
And then the final award, the Gene Hart Award for work ethic and dedication, Sam Urson gets this award. And again, I think this is spot on.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. That one really fits.
Yeah, I think so too. Interestingly, there's only one person on the team currently who won an award last year, and that is Owen Tippett, who won the Pelly Lindbergh Award last season, which was deserved for him last
Yeah.
year. But every other award winner is no longer on the team.
Yeah, that's
So
weird.
it is very, very weird to see that. Continuing our discussion about this season, I think that the biggest question for all of us and for management is, was this season a success? So, hot take, beginning of the off season. How do you feel about that?
It was a success in the sense they overshot expectation, which were very low, and then partial failure on the development side.
Yeah, I think that it was a success for the most part. And I think you're right. There's some, questions as to development. I think, we talked about
And
some lineup.
development of what I would call a prospect. Like Cam York's not a prospect. He's played 169 games. Like
Yeah.
he's no longer a prospect. Just to give an example.
Right. And I think that we saw some guys, make a ton of progress and where they put the time in, and some guys they didn't give them the ice time or the
Right.
shot.
Right.
And so I think, and we saw what happened in Lehigh Valley, and we have to roll that into this
Yes.
discussion. And so it's a difficult question to answer, but I would say on the whole, yes. We are definitely curious what y'all out there think about that. There will be a listener poll posted over on YouTube. So please give us your thoughts on whether this season was a success out there. And we'll talk about it more later this week. As far as, the biggest improvement that this team made this season, what do you think?
The PK. But we also said that if Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson were reasonably healthy, it was going to be better anyhow. But I still give Bradshaw credit. But I mean that helped a lot. If those two guys
Yeah.
weren't there, I think it might have been a different story.
Well, and we got one out of the two of them playing at a decent level, I would
Right.
say.
Yeah.
Or different one of the two playing at a decent level at different points in the season, I guess.
Right.
But so maybe they were one player as a whole.
Maybe,
But
but it makes a difference.
it did. It really did. And I think a lot of people were discounting that for the Flyers at the beginning of the season and weren't taking that into consideration when they said that the Flyers were going to finish last. And
Yeah.
I think when you have Sean Couturier, especially not only just on the ice and coming back from this injury, but you have him in the locker room on a day-to-day basis and his
Right.
leadership. I think that makes a huge difference.
It does. He's real positive. People could, really look to him, follow the leader, as it were, because he's been through a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say, like the biggest thing that they need to work on going into next season,
I mean, I'm
other
just
than the
gonna,
power play?
yeah, I'm
Like,
pushing that aside.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm completely pushing that aside. What I think they need to work on is still the over pinching or having the defense go in deep too many times. I think they need to manage that better. The shorthanded goals dried up, I would say, for the last quarter of the season, maybe a little longer. And while that was rolling, everything's great. But then when it's not rolling, you got to sort of pull it back and say, okay, we're giving up a few too many here. And that's part of the reason the PK dipped.
yeah, I think so. I think that's a really interesting observation and true. And I think we saw it in this last game
Yep.
a lot. Even like on Eric Johnson was in deep a lot in this
Yeah.
game.
Probably
I
more than he
thought,
ever was in his career. And
yeah,
Protas almost got that shorthanded goal. He had a breakaway.
yep, yeah. So, yeah, I think that's a really good observation. And I would say just looking at zone entries and how they accomplish them, because I thought this season overall, there was too much parallel zone entry time
Yeah.
where like the three forwards were too even. They weren't spread out depth wise, like lengthwise on the ice in a way that could create more chances and create the initial puck cycling that would get them in a good position to have
Mm-hmm.
sustained possession as opposed to just trying to score on a rush like a 2-on-1. Those are good,
Yeah.
but you also need to be able to create sustained pressure more
No
often.
doubt.
And I
Yeah.
think their zone entries had a lot to do with it. So that's my big thing other
No, I
than the
like it.
power play. All right. Well, you have a lot of questions going into the off season out there. We're going to answer some of them, including a question on Atkinson, on Massimo Rizzo, on the draft, and more coming up next.
We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's the second period break and the scoreboard's not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game, Monopoly Go. You compete with your friends for the most riches and biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. I kind of like that. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You could even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play.
All right, we got some good mailbag questions here from our listeners, and some of it's related to some of the things we have been talking about over the past few days. And the first of which comes from Brandon when we were talking about our lineup preferences and whether or not to put Cam Atkinson in there. And Brandon says, understanding Atkinson missed an entire year, he's getting older and he's not the player he used to be. It didn't make sense for him to be in the lineup for the final games. Could it possibly have been a farewell tour out of respect from Torts? And is he likely to either retire or be bought out?
Well, I don't think it's out of respect for a farewell tour because it's probably Mark Stahl's too, and he's not playing. So I think it's just whoever what John wants to play. Uh, I do think he's going to get bought out because I do think even though he probably can do something for another team, they're really going to have to manage his minutes and play him maybe 10 minutes a game and kind of use him as a commodity rather than an everyday player trying to play top 6 minutes. He can't. I don't think he could do that anymore. So I think if you got him and you lowered his minutes and you used him a little bit, you might be able to get something like you saw early in the season. But yeah, he's just not the same player, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think so too. And you're right about the difference between Mark Stahl and Cam Atkinson here, because both of them have played for Torts. So I feel
Yeah,
like maybe because he feels Cam Atkinson of the two can contribute a little bit more, but yeah, I do think he legitimately wants to play Atkinson because of having more experience. And I think I still agree that it's the wrong decision to make, but
yeah.
whether it works out in the end or not, from a playoff perspective, I think that it's still the wrong choice. There was also a question from a bunch of people, including Chris and Bill and other comments. Will guys like Rizzo not want to sign here because of torts?
I don't think so because again, someone like Rizzo needs a year or two, maybe a full year in Lehigh. At that point, will Torts even still be here? Who knows? I don't think that's going to be the ultimate factor there. I think they have a decent shot at signing Rizzo. I do.
Yeah, I hope that it happens and happens soon. Brian wants to know when we were talking on yesterday's show about the situation where a team might pull their goalie in overtime. Russ, you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Brian wants to know if it gets to overtime, wouldn't it be over at that point?
Well, okay, so there's a few things. So, and I did steal it really from my friend Ted Starkey, who he had it up first. If you want to in overtime, the thing is, if you still, I forgot what the scenario was. You still want the 2 points over. It's still that I think what it. There's a fifth tiebreaker there that I think matters, and I think it's is it total goals? Like it's whatever it is. It's more goals. Total goals for the season, something like that. It had something to do with the fifth tiebreaker. So I do think there's a chance we see something weird like that, or even see Torts pull the goalie with like 8 minutes to go in regulation. But that's where I got it from. There was something online, but it's all so confusing. Could I repeat it now? No, I probably can't.
Yeah, and also at the time when we were recording that, the scenarios might have been a little bit different than they
They
were
were.
after the games on Monday night. So it gets a little complicated there, but it is a valid situation that came up, although extremely, extremely unlikely. So
Yeah.
I don't think we would have had to deal with it, to be frank. Um, at AQN 1976 commented over on YouTube, I much rather they remain at the current 12th pick, either Tej Ginla or Hellenius, instead of win a game that would be meaningless, more or less because the chances of them winning are small.
Okay. I like your thought. I don't think either player will be there. Sorry. Um, I think you may have to find another player
Mm.
for 12. But I like the thinking, and I don't disagree with you. But the coach is going to do everything in his power to win this game. So he's going to try and do what you don't want to happen.
Right. I think that you just have to try and win every game and let the chips fall where they may
Yeah, and that's
in
what's going
that
to happen.
circumstance. I think that that's the right thing to do from a coaching perspective, from a player perspective,
Yeah.
and
I mean, the odds are
um,
very remote now. Very.
right. And that's where the GM puts the thumb on the scale if they want a tank, but
Right.
the coaches and the players don't do that, and they shouldn't do that.
Right.
Matt wants to know who is your unsung hero for the Flyers this season.
Unsung hero for Igor Zamula, because he was only getting used because at the beginning because the team didn't want to lose him. So the coach did very little to kind of integrate him, just kept running that 11-7 out there just to kind of give him some time. And then he became a very important defenseman, a very go-to defenseman. a guy who still probably doesn't get enough credit for the good year he's had.
Yeah, that is a really great answer and the one that I was going to give. So, I think
I stole your
that
thunder.
you did. You absolutely did. I think that I am going to put out there Brad Shaw because I think
I like it.
that, running that PK and being as successful as it was, I know it dipped a little bit toward the end of the season, but everything dipped toward the end of the
Oh, yeah.
season on this team. So you have to sort of think that that high level wasn't sustainable for an entire 82 games. And, it kind of went a little bit as the rest of the team went. So, and there were injuries that affected it and all of that.
It
But
all
as
kind
far
of
as the coach,
sagged. It all kind of sagged like a bad batch of Botox.
oh man, that is a rough go. Um, the yeah, that the PK was such a highlight of this season for me, and his coaching and the players' willingness to buy into that system was so perfect that you got to give him a little bit of an extra bonus
Yeah,
here
he did more than
for
any
the season.
assistant had to do in the league, taking press conference, taking the lead in press conferences,
hmm
maybe once or twice when he wasn't even realizing he was going to be on, out in front of the media. So yeah, I like it.
All right. And our last question from Chris Machete. Can a team that traded a UFA re sign him if his current team doesn't extend his contract? As an example, can the Flyers re sign Sean Walker if he's still a UFA after the season? If so, do the Flyers get to keep the first round pick?
Yes, they get to keep the pick. Yes, they can make the trade because they didn't retain salary. So if you retain salary in that deal, then you have to wait 1 year.
Right, so they can re-sign him
They can re-sign him.
as a free agent,
Yes,
if he doesn't sign elsewhere and decides he wants to come back,
correct.
that is correct, due to a lack of retained salary, which is honestly a pretty good aspect of the deal, I must say,
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, that made it
and,
better.
yeah, absolutely. All right, that will do it for today's show. We will be back tomorrow with more of the aftermath of this season. We're going to start talking about locker cleanout day and our weekly prospect profile for draft eligible prospect Liam Greentree. Really excited to talk about this kid as well. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. Send in your mailbag questions via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league like Locked On NHL. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Have a great day, everyone.